Hey there, welcome. I'd like to thank everyone for joining in on this unique topic for an aquarium hobby presentation. Before I begin, I'll ask, are we on the internet? Because this story all started on the internet. The date is February 22nd, 2013. You're on a reefing forum and you come across a thread titled, "I'm afraid these 91 fish will not survive." What would your immediate response be? Mild curiosity, worry, fear, anger? There had to be a story behind such a title, so let's click on it and open the thread. Upon opening the thread, you're immediately relieved from any worried feelings about the state of these 91 fish. This was the main photo that I posted in 2013 about my first batch of fish cookies. Throughout the thread, I presented the fish cookies like they were real fish. I had written that they were all in quarantine totes and they were to be released the next day, but I feared that they would not survive very long. The response to this post and the included photos was overwhelmingly positive. There were a lot of comments and personal messages coming in from people I had never met or spoken to. Around this time, I wasn't very visible on any social platform. I was mainly using the forums as a research tool to learn more about new advancements made since my return to the hobby. Unknown to me, the forum had posted the photo or thread on its Facebook page, which at the time I wasn't on Facebook or had any interest in social media at all. That next morning, I headed out to attend the Live Aquaria open house tour with the fish cookies. During the event, a few staff members were smiling and asked if I had brought any cookies. How did they know? This was a complete surprise to me as I had never stated where these fish cookies were headed. I presented the cookies to Kevin Cohen and the staff as a thank you for their assistance on our previous visit. While walking around the facility looking at the fish and corals and talking with Kevin and the staff, I was being introduced or referred to as, "He's that fish cookie guy." So who is that fish cookie guy? My name is Jason Langer and I'm from New Richmond, Wisconsin, a small town located in west central Wisconsin within an hour's drive east from the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm a custom cabinet builder by trade. For the last 25 years, I've been building residential cabinetry along with custom built-ins, aquarium stands, and other woodworking projects. My interest in aquariums goes back to my childhood. We usually had an aquarium or two in our house while growing up, mainly freshwater. But there was a brief stint in the mid-80s with a small saltwater tank when you could order pygmy seahorses and horseshoe crabs from the back pages of magazines. My first aquarium was a 20-gallon freshwater tank in my college dorm room that included a freshwater white-cheeked moray eel with South American cichlids. A couple of years later, I switched over to a saltwater predator tank featuring a moray eel. A couple of years after that, I set up my first reef aquarium. My first. And then I set up a second, a third, fourth, and so on. And then I stepped away from the hobby for about 8 years. Once getting back into the hobby, I joined TC Mass, the Twin Cities Marine Aquarium Society, to connect with other local saltwater aquarium hobbyists. I also signed up for and perused the larger reef keeping forums as well. And then in 2018, I started a small business named Foursquare Aquatics building algae turf scrubbers. So how did I get here? How did I combine my saltwater aquarium hobbies with cookies and art? Since I was a young kid, I enjoyed drawing. All I wanted to be as a grown-up was an artist. I loved watching Saturday morning cartoons and drawing pictures from my favorite shows and movies. In the mid-80s, I submitted a drawing to the Art Instruction School's contest. I was interviewed and accepted into their home study art school, which I attended, until I got busy in high school with a job and the other activities that distract teenagers. I went off to college to study art and film animation. My dream job was to work with the Disney Film Animation Department. After 2 years in college and not having the financial means to continue, I entered the workforce to pay off my student debt. I had mentioned that I had a freshwater aquarium in college. On a visit to the pet store, I noticed the saltwater tanks and they had a beautiful jewel moray swimming around. I instantly knew that I was hooked and I was going to be setting up a saltwater tank. Check out this setup. Reverse flow under gravel filter with crushed coral, rainbow rock, dead coral skeleton, and caulerpa under a twin tube lighting fixture. The fish included the jewel moray, a rectangle triggerfish, a paddlefin wrasse, volatile lionfish, and eventually more predatory fish. After a couple years of the predatory fish only tank, I set up my first reef tank in 1994. Now we're using collected live rock, hang on the back filtration, and multiple strip lighting fixtures. The livestock included smaller reef fish, a dwarf angelfish, a coal tang, shrimp gobies, small wrasses, and hawkfish. Corals were limited to leather corals, colt corals, polyps, mushrooms, and more of that caulerpa. There was even a time when I had a small tank set up specifically for an octopus. I tried my luck with two separate specimens of Octopus bimaculoides. Those were a great experience. Over time, the addiction grew. My eventual wife also enjoyed the hobby, so more tanks and upgrades happened. I tried a bare bottom tank for a while with metal halide lighting so I could keep some clams. I eventually set up a 6-foot 100-gallon Fowler tank with my first overflow and sump, Venturi protein skimmer, and power compact lighting system. By the summer of 2001, we probably had 5 to 7 tanks set up, but we were moving into a new home, and I decided to sell it all. It was time to take a break and raise our children. In 2009, our kids discovered the photographs of the old aquarium systems. My son asked for a small aquarium for Christmas, and I wasn't going to say no. He started with a 15-gallon nano reef with a pair of gobies. Within months, he used his own money to upgrade to a 45-gallon cube, and I ended up upgrading the rest of the setup. Over the next few years, we had a nice, thriving reef tank. By 2013, we upgraded again into a 120-gallon reef system, which was my dream-size tank. I designed and built the stand and canopy to complement the arts and crafts design that is present in our furniture. This reef system did very well for about 5 years before I turned it down due to a Montipora coral crash, followed by a plague of invasive blue mushrooms. So after taking some time to regroup, I rebooted the 120-gallon system with a new rimless tank, new lighting, new filtration, the works. This is my reef system today, mainly focusing on Montipora, Goniopora, and Lobophilia corals. The bottom photo shows my 32-gallon soft coral reef system with a small harem of Ningaloo black Clarkii clownfish. So that's my history within the hobby and my artistic background. How did these two interests collide? Let's go back to the opening story of these 91 fish cookies. My family first visited the Dr. Foster's and Smith Live Aquaria Coral Farm and Aquatic Life Facility in 2012. This was an amazing experience for us all. We've all been to numerous local fish stores, but this was on another level. For us, it was the proverbial kids in a candy store. The vast selection of fish and corals was nothing like we had seen before. Our kids were 12 and 10 years old at the time, and they were just as excited and had just as many questions as I did. We met Kevin Cohen for the first time, and he answered all of our questions, showed us some unique animals, and treated us to a personal tour of the entire facility. While doing our shopping, we were assisted by another very helpful, courteous, and very patient staff member, Felicia McCauley. After having such an enjoyable first visit, we signed up for another tour in February 2013. This time, I wanted to bring a treat as a thank you for Kevin and the staff. Having just baked and decorated cutout cookies for the Christmas holiday, I thought I would make some fish cookies. This wasn't my first time making fish-themed cookies. I had actually made my first fish cookies back in 1994, but it was just a few species that never really amounted to anything after that one time. I created a list of different fish shapes that I wanted to make, and I made some custom cookie cutters and decorated a selection of popular fish species. After I finished decorating the cookies, I took some photos and decided to share the cookies online. That's when I posted the thread concerning the state of these 91 fish cookies. I brought the cookies to the open house event, and after the cookies were presented, I was talking with Kevin and the staff about how they knew about the cookies prior to my arrival, and many of them mentioned the Facebook post. I wasn't on Facebook at the time, but after some discussion, I decided to sign up myself and share the cookies with more people. Now, as an unfortunate side note, our helpful live aquaria friend Felicia had moved away from Wisconsin and didn't get to enjoy a fish cookie. Ever since that visit, we have attended just about every open house tour that didn't conflict with our son's hockey schedule. And with every visit, we brought another batch of fish cookies to share. And each batch of fish cookies included new and improved fish species. Some of the new cookies worked out well, while others needed more practice. Those top two wrasses have basically stayed the same over the years, but those bottom two really needed some help. And some of them even surprised me. I didn't know if I could pull off a lionfish cookie, but this is one of my all-time favorites. At this time, I started using smaller tips and new techniques to capture the details of more difficult fish species. For one of the open house tours, I decided to give Kevin a couple of special fish cookies based on a couple of wrasses that he had kept and photographed. These cookies were much bigger than usual and involved more colors and detail than I was normally using, but these fish species were immediately recognized by Kevin as his own fish. So now here's what you all want to know, right? How do I make the fish cookies? It all starts with the cookie. The recipe that I used for the cutout cookies was one given to me by a friend when I moved down to Chicago for school. It's your basic cutout cookie recipe that also includes some almond flavoring. A single batch of dough can make up to 4 dozen fish cookies. So when I'm making cookies, I'm usually making multiple batches. Once the cookie dough is mixed, it needs to chill for about an hour before it can be cut. While the dough is chilling, I prepare the icing. I used to make the icing from scratch, but now that I can buy a similar icing already made, I buy that instead. It's close to the flavor of the homemade icing, but I add more vanilla and almond flavoring to make it taste more like my homemade icing. I then use icing colors to create the colors needed for the specific species that I am working on. I collect the cutters that I need for that batch of cookies. In the beginning, I created a cutter to use with each genus of fish, so multiple species were using the same cutter. But over time, I have found that most species have a little variance that differentiates them from other species, and my cookie cutter selection has grown. I believe I have created upwards of 60 or more fish cookie cutters at this time. So let's take a look at how I make a fish cookie cutter. I make the cutters out of copper strips. I purchased a roll of copper flashing and cut the roll into 1-inch strips about 20 inches long using a crafting circle blade cutter. Every good cookie cutter starts with a good design, so I sketch out the shape of the desired fish to use as a template for the cutter. To shape the cutter, I use a variety of simple tools to create the bends needed for the cutter. I begin each cutter midway on the dorsal fin and work my way around the tail using the wooden blocks to create the sharp bends. I make sure to keep the copper strip as flat as possible on the countertop so it will create a nice clean cut in the cookie dough. Once the cutter is fully shaped, a slight overlap of the copper strip is needed to close the cutter. Any excess copper is trimmed off. To join the copper ends, I use a small crafting punch and riveting tool. The cutter is complete and ready to be used. I roll out the chilled cookie dough and start cutting out the fish cookies. The fish cookies are baked at 350 degrees for about 7 minutes or the cookies start to brown on the edges. It's important to watch the thin tips of the tails and pelvic fins as they can burn quickly. As the cookies cool off, I can fill the icing bags with the colored icing. The icing bags are equipped with a coupler to easily change out the various tips that are used during decorating. The bulk of the decorating is done with a star tip. number 16 down to number 13. My decorating workstation will include sheets of parchment paper, the cookie and icing bags, and black sugar pearls that are used for the pupils and the eyes. If I am decorating multiple cookies of the same species, I will place each cookie onto a small piece of parchment paper so I can easily move them around as I decorate. Now it's time for the fun part, decorating the cookie. The cookies are decorated more like a cake than a cookie. Each little star is squeezed by hand. This is going to give your hand a workout, trust me. I usually start with the tail and work my way over the cookie. Some species are easier to decorate than others, and over time, I find the best method for decorating each species, and I try to remember how I did it. The first time decorating a species is the most difficult, but after that, it gets much easier. I work my way over the cookie, making sure I've included the pectoral fins as I fill in the entire cookie with icing. I switch the icing tip to a round tip and add a dollop of icing for the eye. The final step is to add the black sugar pearl for the pupil, and there you have it, a completed fish cookie. Over time, with lots of practice, the cookies look a little better and become just a little bit easier to decorate. Certain species start getting finer details and better colors added to make them look more like the real fish, like adding the blue edges to the fins and multiple colors included in the eyes. Once the cookies are decorated, I place them onto a pan and they go into the freezer. The decorator icing is too soft for stacking and storage. Once the icing is frozen, I can stack them into food-safe containers and keep them in the freezer until they are ready to be packaged up for delivery or to be taken out and eaten. Once the cookies started appearing on social media, requests started coming in. People wanted to order these fish cookies. The problem with these cookies is that the cookies do not ship well. They need to be kept as cold as possible to prevent the icing from getting soft and getting ruined. This requires dry ice and overnight shipping to produce the best results. But that didn't deter everyone. I was contacted by Ecotech Marine to make a batch of cookies for a company retreat that they were having. Various fish cookies were made along with cookies of the Ecotech Marine logo as well. I was also contacted by Dustin Dorton from ORA with the idea of recreating the species of clownfish that they aquaculture to use for their April Fool's Day prank on their website. I ended up recreating all 39 species of clownfish that they offered. I hand cut out each fish cookie and decorated them as close as possible with the icing colors that I had mixed up. That was one long and stressful project, but they were very pleased and appreciative. It was also one of my favorite cookie projects to date. Also that year, I was approached by Tal Sweet to make some clownfish cookies for the 2014 MBI conference. I chose some of the popular aquacultured clownfish species from that summer, including the 2 lightning maroon clownfish to be raffled off in the drawing. Over the next couple of years, I would make fish cookies for the speakers and guests of TC Mass events. When I learned that I was going to be attending MACNA 2017 in New Orleans, I knew that I wanted to bring a couple of cookies for each speaker, along with as many more cookies as possible to share with friends that I had made over the years. I ended up bringing down 120 fish cookies with me to New Orleans. The cookies were boxed in coolers with dry ice and were checked onto our flight down to New Orleans. Thankfully, most of them made the trip intact. Thanks to Kevin Cohen and Live Aquaria, I was able to attend an event held for the speakers the night before MACNA. I was able to meet many of the speakers and gift them their cookies. It was amazing to see the responses on their faces when they saw their cookies. They were now the kids in a candy store. I walked around the exhibit floor with a cooler full of cookies and I managed to hand out just about every cookie. I was finally able to gift 2 seahorse cookies to Felicia, 5 years after meeting her at the open house tour in Rhinelander. The fish cookies also caught the attention of Randy Donowitz with Reefs.com. He presented me with one of their Best of 2017 awards, something that I never expected to happen. I still display that award in my office today. While on the Magna exhibit floor, Kevin introduced me to Chris Berner of Quality Marine. He expressed interest in the fish cookies, and eventually we collaborated on a project at the end of the year. Also thanks in part to Mark Callahan for an order of cookies that he had sent to Quality Marine. Quality Marine sent out a small box of the fish cookies to select clients and acquaintances as part of the year-end appreciation. Two of the species included were the Naihaki dwarf angelfish and the Naihaki fairy wrasse, and apparently a box of the cookies were sent to Tony Naihaki himself. In all, I think I made 216 fish cookies for that project. I have also made some fish cookies for special events, including a couple of weddings. And I'm still bringing cookies to the live aquaria open house tours. Here's some of my favorite fish cookies that I've created over the years. The Harlequin tuskfish is my all-time favorite fish. The Mandarin Dragonet was a challenge as I used new techniques to recreate the complex patterns of the fins and body. The Blue Hippotang was popular with the clownfish cookies for some reason, and the Juvenile Interruptus angelfish was a test to see if I could do a spotted fish. One batch of fish cookies highlighted some of the larger angelfish species. New techniques were also sampled here to see if I could show the complex color patterns on each scale. The conspic angelfish is on my bucket list of fish to keep. The queen angelfish is a requested favorite of many. The goldflake angelfish is a beauty, and the Navarcus angelfish is one of my old-time favorites as well. The summer of 2018 brought about a collection of wrasse cookies. Some of my favorite from that batch included the pintail fairy wrasse, a fish I absolutely think is amazing. The bloodstained fairy wrasse was a cool fish to make. The Scott's fairy wrasse really stands out in a crowd, especially with those greens. And the blue striped tamarin wrasse was a real test to see if I could make all of those thin stripes. And over the years, fish cookies weren't just limited to your tropical reef fish. I created a couple of larger Pacific striped octopus cookies in 2017. A collection of seahorses also popped up in 2017 as well. Even a couple of Apocyclops copepod cookies surfaced in 2019, and I made a couple dozen walleye fish cookies back in 2016 for a family event. Ever since that first batch of fish cookies back in 2013, people from all over had requested cookies. These cookies are great, but what's strange to me is that many people don't even want to eat these cookies. They keep them in their freezer. I hear these kind of statements all the time. They're too nice to eat. I want to save them, but I keep telling these people to eat them. That's what they're for. So it's always been a plan of mine to figure out a way to make the fish cookies more permanent. I tried different icings that didn't work out or taste as good. So I decided it wasn't feasible with real cookies and icing. I would need to try a different approach. Being the artist that I am, I thought that making the cookies out of polymer clay would be a perfect solution. I've used polymer clay many times before for small projects. I could roll out the clay just like dough, use the cookie cutter to cut the clay cookie, and then find an alternative to icing that would hold up in shipping and over time. I tried numerous icing alternatives: drywall compound, painting mediums, and even silicone. Trying to make any of those mediums to look just like decorator icing was a fail. So I researched how to make polymer clay icing. By mixing in mineral spirits, you can soften the clay into a more fluid form. This looked like it could work. It did work, but it wasn't as easy as it seems. The softened clay became extremely sticky and messy. Getting the clay to form the icing stars on the clay cookie was a nightmare. A lot of the stars had to be picked off until the perfect star was achieved. Even when the cookie was decorated, the cleanup was laborious and my hands were extremely oily and colored bright red. On top of that, baking the clay icing was not as easy as plain polymer clay. The additional oils in the clay made the clay harden much slower than normal, and the tips of the stars are still pliable and fragile. I only created 2 peppermint angelfish clay cookies. Mark Levinson has one, as he requested one right from the first time he had seen the cookies, and I have the other. Those will likely be the only two clay fish cookies that I ever make. I needed to find another solution. From the failed attempt with clay, I started to look at other alternatives. Since I'm a woodworker, what can I make from wood? In 2018, I had torn off our old deck and saved the cedar decking and railing to use in some type of a woodworking project. Since the fish cookie projects are always on my mind, I thought about how I could incorporate the reclaimed cedar into a fish project. Since the aged and weathered wood was too rough for any detail work, I decided to make silhouettes of the reef fish. I used a black stain to darken the silhouette and the frame, and then used spray paint to color the background to make it look like water. I like this new project, but unless you knew a lot about reef fish body shapes, you wouldn't know which species was being represented with just a silhouette. To make the silhouette more identifiable, I started painting the background with the colors of the fish species. This looked better. Of course, another peppermint angelfish. As I added more species to this project, the background started to get more specific as well, with more colors and even patterns. Here's a bandit angelfish. And here's the iconic yellow tang. This was one of my favorite pieces in this medium. Over the next few months, I created about 24 of these silhouette pieces, and my supply of reclaimed cedar decking was running low. I started to look for other materials. On Pinterest, there seemed to be a popular trend with people using old wood pallets for artwork. I had a pallet lying around, so why not give it a try? And being the dad that I am, my first pallet project was of Vipera acanthus hepatus, the blue regal tang, or the blue hippo tang, or the pallet tang. My family didn't find the pun as humorous as I did. Even though the pallet tang silhouette looked good, after a couple of days I decided to try painting it. Why not? If I ruined the piece, it wasn't like anyone thought it was something special or funny. Now this is the point in my story where I must let you in on a secret. I don't like to paint. I never did. Not in grade school, not in college, never. For me, paints are messy and I don't have control over the colors like I do when I'm using colored pencil. Remember that Lion King drawing from earlier? That was in colored pencil. I had only done a couple of painted projects before this, and they looked more like a paint by numbers painting, as the colors weren't blended together and each color had its own space and looked clean. But I decided it was the only way to add color to this reclaimed palletfish artwork. I didn't spend much time on it, as I viewed this as just a test to see what I thought about painting the fish. Surprisingly to me, I liked it. I liked how it looked and I liked doing it. So you can teach an old dog new tricks. Around the time I finished working on this piece, I had figured out that a certain fish that I thought I would never get to see in my lifetime was within a reasonable possibility for me to see. A peppermint angelfish was close by. So I sent a quick and vague inquiry to Kevin in Rhinelander to my hopes of seeing the peppermint angelfish firsthand. It was. With an opportunity of this magnitude, simple fish cookies won't be thanks enough. The next project was to paint a peppermint angelfish on the reclaimed palette material. I took the photo posted by Quality Marine and used it as reference for the fish cutout and the painting. For my paint supplies, I used Liquitex Basics acrylic paint, which is readily available and works well for me. But what do I know? I don't like to paint. I painted the fish very much in the same way as I decorated the fish cookies. I start with the tail and I work my way across the fish. Painting a base coat of simple colors, I can visualize what the painting will look like before I start focusing on more colors and details. After the base coat has dried, I begin to add more layers of paint, adding in the highlights and shadows to create the form of the fish. The accent colors are added to really make the painting look more realistic. And then I finish up with the important details like the eyes and fins. Painting this peppermint angelfish took a few weeks. In fact, I was very nervous about painting it. I wanted it to be perfect. So one day in early July of 2019, a few of us fish nerds were invited to visit the live aquaria facility to see the peppermint angelfish with our very own eyes. It did not disappoint. It was a spectacular specimen that behaved as if it had no idea of how much of an impact it was having on its spectators. And as per my usual visits, I did bring along just a few peppermint angelfish cookies to celebrate the day. But I also gifted the painted peppermint angelfish to Kevin for making what I thought an impossibility a reality. Upon returning home from that special day, I decided that I also wanted a painted peppermint angelfish to hang on my wall as well, so I painted another one for myself. Now that I enjoyed painting these larger-than-life reef fish, I next turned to my all-time favorite fish, the harlequin tuskfish. This painting really pushed my newfound painting abilities. There is so much color and fine detail on this fish that it took me a good month to finally get it finished, painting all day long for as long as I could. The fantastic reference photo was a photo taken by Yi Kai Ti, or known as Lemon, amongst his friends. He was very supportive throughout the painting process, and I feel like I did it justice when he approved of it. My next project would be another piece gifted to someone that had been very supportive of my cookies and artworks. I was going to be attending Aquashella in Chicago, where Richard Ross would be one of the guest speakers. I had mentioned back in the early 1990s I had kept two separate octopus bimaculoides in a small reef system. I am fascinated with octopuses, and Rich seems to have that reputation as well. So my next painting project was going to be a larger Pacific striped octopus. One of the photos that I found interesting was a photo that Rich had taken of the two octopuses during their face-to-face mating. I didn't think that the reclaimed palettes were the best medium for this painting, so I glued up a bunch of reclaimed poplar strips and sanded them smooth before cutting out the shape of the two octopuses. Working on this painting was also a learning experience. It's not easy trying to distinguish which arm belongs to which octopus when your reference photo is quite small and not the best quality. And on top of that, there was a very definite deadline to having this piece completed. In the end, I really liked how this one turned out. As soon as I returned home from Chicago, I started painting the next project. In fact, I think I had it cut out and sketched before that trip. Back when I finished painting the harlequin tuskfish based on Lemon's photograph, he mentioned that he would someday like to have a piece of his own, preferably a fish that he had described himself. I knew what he was hinting at, the pintail fairy wrasse, since it's a favorite fish for us both. But I had other plans. Lemon had also just described a fish in honor of his mother, the Chromis ting ting, or the moonstone chromis. I felt that a painting of this fish would hold more sentimental value for Lemon. Fairy wrasses are a dime a dozen, but there's only one mom. Once again, I felt stressed out painting this fish. This fish has very pronounced definition in its scales, and the light just bounces off of each one. I can tell you now that there's almost another whole painting beneath the painting you see now. My next large reclaimed palette painting was another one that was destined for the live aquaria facility in Rhinelander. The juvenile interruptus angelfish was another one of those rare fishes that I had gotten to see firsthand at the facility. I really like the striking color contrast between the deep blues and the bright yellow. This painting was a part of a sign that I had planned to deliver to the facility in early 2020. But with the times we are in today, I have yet to make the trip over there. My schedule this past year has been very full outside of my day job. I have had a handful of aquarium stand projects, and it seems like I've been building algae scrubbers every month all year as well. So when I had a little break in my schedule, I jumped into painting another piece for myself that I had sitting around for most of the year. I am waiting to add a pair of the Japanese masked swallowtail angelfish to my reef tank, and I also wanted a painted pair to hang on my wall. The female was painted first, and the male will have to wait for another break in my schedule. And also over this past year, I've also done other forms of painted artwork besides the larger reclaimed palette board pieces. I scaled the paintings down a bit that could be done in a quicker time frame. I created a mini palette fish from taking thin strips off the edges of boards and gluing them together to form a smaller version of the reclaimed palettes. As before, I started with a simple test subject, the yellow tangs. Over the next couple of weeks, I added more of these smaller mini palette fish paintings to my collection. The conspic angelfish is always a stunner, whether as a fish cookie or a painting. And at some point, I needed to paint some clownfish, right? And how about painting corals? These scolies turned out to be a great subject for painting. All of these smaller pieces would be destined to be included on a sign for another supporter of my fish cookies and artwork. So here's a couple of the signs that I had painted for my two local fish stores. New Wave Aquaria in Plymouth, Minnesota, and the Live Aquaria Aquaculture Facility in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. And also last year, when I was trying to figure out a more permanent way to share my fish artwork, I purchased a laser engraver cutter. This machine would allow me to mass produce my artwork in various mediums right at my desk. The manufacturer states that you're able to cut your first piece within 30 minutes of setting up the machine. And I did. I just selected the photo of my painted harlequin tuskfish, uploaded it into the user interface on my computer, pushed the button, and there it was, the first reef fish cutout. So now it was time to begin a new chapter in the Fish Cookie Guy book of projects. So what fish did I decide to do first? Of course, I chose to do a peppermint angelfish first. I started by drawing up the fish, and then using black markers, I line in what I want to be included in the engraving. The drawing is then scanned and uploaded into a software program that converts it into a file that is used by the laser engraver. With a push of the button, magic. The laser first engraves the fish into the selected medium and then cuts out the shape to create a raw piece of fish art. These cutouts can be cut to any size, flipped in any direction, and they can be used for just about anything. The next process was to determine the best method coloring in the raw fish cutouts. My first test was done with colored pencils. Since these cutouts were small, most are cut to 4 inches in length. The colored pencil looked messy, so I tried some cheap acrylic paint markers. The result was much better than I thought, but I knew I could make it even better. I knew that there was better paint markers out there, so I ordered a set of high-quality artists' acrylic paint markers, and these were just what I was looking for. With these better paint markers, I could quickly fill in the base colors on the raw draft board. Once that paint dries, I come back and I combine the markers with my painting skills. I use paint brushes and water to blend the colors and add the details that the markers cannot do alone. So after 7 years of trying to figure out a more permanent way of sharing my fish cookie art with people, I have come as close as I can. These small fish cutouts can be easily produced and shipped to anywhere in the world without the risk of breaking, melting, or getting smashed. But unfortunately, they will not taste the same. My plan is to create an extensive catalog of fish species in the fish cutout format. Over the summer, I have created over 50 species of fish in select groups. One of the first groups I nicknamed the P. Sherman Collection. I also started with some of my favorite butterfly fish. I completed the common species of Zebrasoma surgeonfishes, and I routed out the Paracentropyge angelfish, including the multibar venustus hybrid. As I was posting these new fish cutouts on Facebook, I was contacted by Matthew Peterson for a commission of the four-eyed butterfly fish. This cutout was larger at 8 inches long, and it was hand-painted with the Liquitex Basic acrylic paints, the same that I use on my other wood paintings. And later, I was contacted by Caitlin Lee for a commission to be a gift for Mark Levinson, his Nasotang Spock. I was sent photos of the fish to use as reference, and I painted the piece to match his fish. The painted cutouts are then float mounted into a shadow box for display. And while in the holiday spirit, I decided it was time to work on my initial plan of making these fish cutouts as ornaments. For a more rustic feel, I used reclaimed rough-sawn pine strips that were about a 1/4 inch thick. The ornaments are engraved on both sides and left unpainted. I still have a long list of project ideas for these fish cutouts, a long list. When I find more time to get back to drawing up more species for the fish cutouts, I will add more and more. I have over 50 species now, but that's way short of where I'd like to be before I advance to the next phase of these projects, a website for purchasing my fish art pieces. I know, they're not cookies, but most people don't eat those anyways. And I'll end this presentation with what I usually start a project with, some peppermint angelfish. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to give this presentation about my story with these fish cookies and painted artwork. A special thank you to the following list of people that have supported, encouraged, and tolerated me in this endeavor. My wife and my family, Kevin Cohen and the staff at the Live Aquaria Coral Farm and Aquatic Life Facility in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, the Twin Cities Marine Aquarium Society, and Lemon for the enthusiastic support and the incredible reference photos I use in much of my work. And the following list of people that have supported me by purchasing cookies and or artwork, by promoting my artwork and projects, and by sharing my work through your social media accounts. A sincere thank you to anyone that has shared my fish cookies. You can find me and my projects on Facebook, Instagram, and the forums. I will now end this presentation with what has become somewhat of a mantra with the fish cookies. If I make a fish cookie and I see you and you get one of them fish cookies, please eat them. That's why I make them. Thank you.